Hey guys, welcome back to Whiskey on the West Coast. My name is Matt, and Christmas is just around the corner. And if you think you've heard me say that before, well, it's probably because you have. This is our second annual single malt Scotch whiskey Christmas gift list. And if you watched our first one last year, that was one of our first videos, and hopefully you can see just how far we've come in a year. But the purpose of this list is to suggest to you some bottles you can buy the single malt Scotch whiskey lover in your life. Maybe it's a family member, maybe it's a friend, but if they like Scotch whiskey, hopefully there's something on this list that you can buy them this Christmas season. I also have some categories on this list, such as bottles that you can bring with you to a Christmas party. Some of the categories we're going to cover overall are going to be best sherry bomb that you can buy this Christmas season, a really great heavily peated whiskey you can buy the whiskey lover in your life, as well as stick around till the end so that you can see what I suggest is a best value bottling to buy as a Christmas gift this year. Let's get to the list. First category we're going to talk about is the Christmas party gift bottle. Now, what I mean by this is a bottle that you can bring with you to a Christmas party, to a gathering, a get together. It's not going to break the bank. It's a bottle you can bring and you can leave behind at the party because you didn't spend that much on it. But it's actually going to be a bottle that I think people will appreciate, depending on what type of people you're with. But as long as they are whiskey drinkers, I think they'll find something to like in this. All right, so the first bottle I'm going to talk about, because I'm actually going to talk about three candidates in this category. The first one I'm going to talk about is the Naked Malt. Now, the Naked Malt is a bottling released by the Edrington Group, and it's a blended malt Scotch whiskey, which means it is 100% malt whiskey. There's no grain in it, which is fantastic because this bottling cost me $35 Canadian, which is an absolute steal when you consider the fact that for $3 less, you're paying $32 for a bottle of Johnny Walker Red, which is loaded with grain whiskey. And really, I wouldn't serve to my worst enemy right now. That said, it's from the Edgerton Group. And if we think about what whiskeys could be in this bottle, which is bottled at 43%, mind you, our version here in North America, I know there's a 40% version out there, but this is the 43% that I'm recommending. Edgerton Group, under their banner, has the likes of Macallan, Highland Park, and Glenrothes. And so it would make sense that they'd be using whiskeys from their own stable to bottle in this Naked Malt. So I think we're pretty safe to assume that there's some amount at least of Macallan, Highland Park, and Glenrothes in this bottling. What they do with it is they actually give it an extra maturation, they call it, in first fill sherry casks. So this is a sherry cask finished blended malt that's likely composing those Macallan, Highland Park, and Glenrothes whiskeys. That's a fantastic proposition. And I'm going to tell you, I only recently bought this bottle because I always turned my nose up at it. And then I bought a bottle because it was such a good price. And I smelled it and I tasted it. And it really stands up. Like, it's a fantastic proposition for the price. So I'm recommending that this is a great bottle to bring with you to a Christmas party and intend to leave behind. I think a lot of people would appreciate it and would be surprised by how strong the sherry influence is on the nose. A lot of the tasting notes, you get lots of like white chocolate. You get some great like almost light black licorice with those dried fruit notes. It's a great whiskey. On top of this though, I want to suggest a couple other whiskeys because we do have people that turn their noses up to blended malts. And one of those I would suggest is a single malt from Laphroaig, from the Isle of Mull, and that is the Laphroaig Sinclair Series Rioja Spanish Red Wine Cask Finish. Now, this is a bottling that unfortunately isn't imported into Canada, but I have been able to get samples of to try. And in the UK, this goes for about 33 pounds, which equates to about $56 Canadian. So just over $50 Canadian, you can get a whiskey that is non-chill filtered, it's natural colored, 46.3% ABV. It's heavily peated coastal single malt that really steers into those sweet, fruity, and yet kind of sour red wine notes with a peat blast as well. It is a fantastic little whiskey for the price. And so if you're with a group of people that will say, oh, no, I don't drink blends, I only drink single malts, it's a great one. It's not an age statement, but it is an integrity malt. And I love everything that comes from Tobermory for the most part, especially their peated distillate Laphroaig. Lastly, a whiskey that just was released in the Canadian market through Alberta and has been exported to the United States, and it was really popular in the UK, is the Macallan's Nose Blended Scotch. Again, we're going to a blend. This one isn't 100% malt though, like the Naked Malt. However, this one is 46% ABV. It's non-chill filtered. It's natural color. This is coming from the same people that bring you Ardnamurchan. It's from basically Adelphi and Co. Now, where this is available, what you need to know about this whiskey is that it's 70% malt content, 30% grain. And of that 70% malt content, it's actually a mixture, a blend of Ardnamurchan and Glen Scotia, a Campbelltown single malt Scotch whiskey. Those put together, along with some grain, it's a fantastic little whiskey, and the price is just awesome. It's $50 Canadian in Alberta right now. Should be a similar price wherever you are. These are my 3 suggestions for a great whiskey you can bring with you to your Christmas party. Next up, we're going to talk about a cask strength single malt Scotch whiskey that you can buy someone for Christmas. And who's this for? This is for the Scotch whiskey aficionado, somebody who likes to be able to find their own preferred drinking strength. Someone who likes to add water to play with it and find really the best drinking strength for them. It's also for that person who gets really geeky about their Scotch. So I picked a really geeky Scotch for that reason. And so the whiskey I'm going to suggest is going to be the Ardnamurchan cask strength. Now, there's been a few different batches of this. The batch I have in front of me here is the AD0222, but there have been a few more batches since. Now, this whiskey cost me about $100 Canadian, which means it doesn't actually break the bank, and it's from a new distillery, something that the person you're buying for may not already be familiar with. Now, Ardnamurchan is a Western Highlands single malt Scotch whiskey distillery. It is coastal, and this whiskey is non-chill filtered. It's natural color. It's bottled at 58.7% ABV, at least this batch. This batch was mostly ex-bourbon with a little bit of sherry casks involved, and really the profile was a lot of orchard fruit. It's fairly mineralic and a nice peated delight of a whiskey, really. Now, why am I saying that you can get really geeky about this whiskey? Well, it's because they're all about telling you as much as they can about the whiskey. For instance, there's a QR code on the back of the bottle that the person you give this to can scan, and then they'll be able to see what bottle number this bottle was, who bottled it, where the barley was grown, all the way to the maturation, how many casks, what cask numbers they were, what they previously held, ex-bourbon and sherry, spoiler alert, and what vintages they were. So this bottling in particular was all casks from 2014 and 2015. It's bottled in early 2022, meaning that all the whiskey that went into this bottle, even though it's not an age statement, is 6 to 8 year old whiskey. It's a phenomenal value, and I think the whiskey geek, whiskey nerd, the whiskey lover or aficionado in your life would probably love this whiskey. Next, we're going to talk about the cask strength sherry bomb. Now, who is this category for? It's for the person in your life who loves sherried single malt Scotch whiskeys. The more sherry, the better. And also likes them at cask strength, at their fullest flavor, and wants to be able to determine their own drinking strength. Now, this is a category that traditionally, for me, would always steer towards something like the Aberlour Abuna or the Glenfarclas 105. Those are some very classic cask strength sherried bomb single malt Scotch whiskeys. However, I don't think they are priced at a place where their performance is really creating a value proposition for us that we want. And I think there might be better options on the market right now. So last year, you will have remembered the first whiskey I'm going to talk about from last year's list. I have reviewed it along with many others in the stable, and it's going to be the Glenallachie 10-year-old cask strength. Now, there's many batches of this, at least 9 batches by now. And it is a whiskey that is steering into those really modern definitions of a cask strength sherry bomb. You're going with like chocolate and an orange, so like a Terry's chocolate orange sort of thing, ginger, cinnamon, like baking spices for sure, as well as some really overarching fruit notes like raisin, prune, plum, like black currants or dried fruits, a lot of those sorts of things, as well as some coffee tones like mocha or espresso. It really is a great cask strength sherry bomb whiskey, even though it's actually including casks in the makeup that aren't sherry casks. They use others like virgin oak or Rioja red wine casks. However, this batch 5, was bottled at 55.9%. It's non-chill filtered, it's natural color, and it really is a great whiskey. Billy Walker used some really wet sherry casks, I'm sure, in the making of this. Now, this runs about $130 Canadian in BC. It goes on sale much cheaper in Alberta, about $100 to $110 Canadian. It's a great option. However, if you're shopping from a place like Alberta or elsewhere, the other whiskey I'm going to mention might be an even better deal. And that would be the Aran, the Bodega single malt Scotch sherry cask whiskey. And it's, again, cask strength. It's a really great whiskey from the Isle of Arran Laphroaig distillery. This one, I'm just going to double check. Yeah, 55.8%. This is also non-chill filtered. It's natural color. This used to be age stated, but unlike the Glenallachie, it doesn't actually carry an age statement anymore. But back in the day when I read into the literature, it was about 8 to 9 years old. Now, it's a more balanced sherry bomb of whiskey, if that makes any sense. It doesn't steer quite as heavily into those modern sherry notes as the Glenallachie, but still a phenomenal whiskey. Again, brought to us, non-chill filtered, natural color, all the sorts of things we want from sherry bombs at cask strength. These are phenomenal whiskeys. The Aran, you can pick up on sale sometimes for about $65 to $70 in Alberta, but the regular price is about $85. In BC, it's actually more expensive than the Glenallachie 10 at about $135, $140. So I wouldn't recommend that here in BC, but if it's less expensive in your area, it might be just as good of a go as the Glenallachie 10 cask strength. Some other options out there might be something like the Tamdhu batch strength. You can look into that one too if these two don't fit, or maybe they already have these ones. Next, we're going to talk about a premium sherried whiskey. Now, this is for the person in your life who just loves something like Macallan 18-year-old. They want a really rich, indulgent, and dignified, maybe classy sherried single malt Scotch whiskey. And so they want something with age, they want something that is a bit more on the premium side cost wise, and they want something that brings that classic sherried profile as opposed to something more modern and more like a slap in your face of sherry. And what I'm going to suggest here is going to be the Tamdhu 18-year-old single malt Speyside Scotch whiskey. This is a whiskey that's brought to you at 46.8%. It's non-chill filtered, it's natural color, and it comes in at about $250 Canadian, which is a higher price, but it's much cheaper than that Macallan 18-year-old. And I mentioned that because someone like Jeremy at Sipper Social Club has suggested that this might be a great whiskey to replace Macallan 18 on your shelf if you're looking for something less expensive. This whiskey is 100% American and European Oloroso sherry cask matured. It has all those classic profiles of the rich, like red fruits, like cherries, lots of the prunes. You get orange, you get all those sorts of spices that you typically get with it, some ginger. It is a more rounded, fuller, mature sherry profile. I already love the 15-year-old. I have tried the 18-year-old. I have a sample of the 18-year-old to go back to. Hopefully bring you guys a review. I don't have this bottle yet because it is a bit more on the pricey side. However, I respect it, and I do think if I was looking for something other than Macallan 18, I would steer towards the Tamdhu 18. If you're looking for something even maybe outside the Tamdhu stable, you don't want to go with the 18 or the 15-year-old, which I already reviewed the 15-year-old on the channel. Perhaps consider, if you can find it, the Aran 18-year-old. It's a great sherried single malt Scotch whiskey. It is typically at a much more affordable price. The last bottle that I picked up was $140 Canadian, but it's gone up quite a bit in price in my market to $320. If it's still reasonable in your market, that's also a great option. Next up, we're going to talk about some bottles that are perfect candidates to buy the heavily peated single malt Scotch whiskey fan in your life. So that's who this is for. Someone who just craves Islay whiskey. They want heavily peated whiskey from wherever it comes from. Doesn't even have to be just from Islay. However, that's where we're going for the bottle suggestions for this category. So the first one I'm going to suggest is going to be Laphroaig Carchus 2023 White Port and Madeira Cask whiskey. Now, this is a single malt Scotch whiskey. It's from the Isle of Islay, as I mentioned. It's from the Laphroaig distillery, which is known for its medicinal coastal seaweed sort of hospital bandage and iodine type peat. Very distinctive peat profile, but this is a sweet peat whiskey. And what I mean by that is they used white port and Madeira casks to really add a lot of sweetness, a lot of dessert flavors to this whiskey and really rounded over that heavily peated profile quite a bit. This is 52.3% ABV. I do believe it's cask strength, and it is a bottling that is released once a year for the Festival. Now, the Carchus releases, they are limited releases because, again, it is a festival bottling, but they are relatively large outturns for a special release whiskey. So you probably should be able to find this. In Canada, it's a little bit tougher. I know there's outturns going on through Alberta. I know BC had their release. That's how I got my bottle. It runs at anywhere between $130 to $150 Canadian. If you can get it, it's a phenomenal whiskey for the heavily peated whiskey fan in your life. However, if you're looking for something that's more of a core range whiskey, might be easier to get, you might want to look at something like the Kilchoman Sanig single malt Scotch whiskey. This comes from the other side of Islay. It's actually on the other side of Lochindal, and it's one of the more recent Islay distilleries. However, this bottling, it comes from 70% Oloroso sherry cask, 30% ex-bourbon cask, and it's bottled at 46% ABV. It's non-chill filtered, it's natural color. It's really a phenomenal whiskey, and it does dive in again to that kind of sweet peat profile. It's 50 phenol parts per million, I believe, the peat content on the grain that went into this whiskey. And it is just, it's more of an earthy peat in my mind, and it really, again, plays into those sweet peat sort of tones. I really love it. I got my bottle for $90 Canadian, which is super reasonable for this whiskey that just seems to keep getting better. I went through a bottle of an earlier batch, and this bottle's definitely already tasting better, so it just keeps getting better and better. These are both great options. Of course, if you want to really crank it up a notch, you can go to something like Laphroaig 10 cask strength, but I feel like everyone is suggesting that. I wanted to give you something different. But if you want something that's absolutely going to blow a peat lover's socks off, yeah, Laphroaig 10 cask strength is also a great option. All right, another category on our list is buy local. And what I mean by this is supporting a distillery that is local to where you live. By doing that, you're not only doing one great thing by giving someone a gift, but you're actually doing two great things by supporting a local business while you're giving that gift. So I think that's a fantastic thing. And I want to talk about two single malt Canadian distilleries located here in my home province of British Columbia that I think are making some of the best single malt in the country, and I love supporting. So the first one I want to talk about is coming from Victoria, British Columbia, and it is Macallan's Canadian Island Distillery. Now, Macallan's has a fantastic cask regimen. They use fantastic casks when making their whiskey. They brought in the legendary Jim Swan to advise them when they set up the distillery not so long ago. And you can tell by the look of this whiskey, this is a sherry cask small batch release of about 600 casks. They used Pedro Jimenez and Oloroso sherry casks, and this is darker than Coca-Cola. These are wet, fresh, first fill casks for sure. Now, they're not all sherry casks, not all about cask treatment. They do some lovely ex-bourbon releases as well. But what I find most exciting about what Macallan's is doing is their work with local peat local to British Columbia and Washington State. And they are actually smoking barley at their own distillery up to the point of 54 phenol parts per million, which is that's extremely high. That is a heavily peated whiskey. And they're bringing heavily peated whiskey using local peat to the west coast of Canada. That's something that Westland and Washington State has done as well, but Macallan's is doing it here in British Columbia, and I want to support them in every way I can. So I would suggest, if you're in BC, they're a great option, as well as one of my favorite, probably my favorite distillery in Canada, which is going to be Shelter Point. Now, Shelter Point recently released not one, but two age-stated whiskeys, which is something for Canada. That's something incredible for Canada. We have the Shelter Point 10-year-old and the recently released Shelter Point 12-year-old. Now, the outturn is much larger on the Shelter Point 10, and they are located in Campbell River, also on Vancouver Island, I should mention. The 10 had a much larger outturn. I recently reviewed that on the channel, so you can go back and check out a review there. But it actually was a really lovely whiskey that you could mistake for a Highland single malt Scotch whiskey. You really could. And I've tried this 12-year-old. I haven't cracked my bottle of it yet, but it just seemed to continue that process of maturing, rounding out any off notes. They're in young Shelter Point. I sometimes find a slightly solventy note. Not so in these aged releases. It's phenomenal whiskey coming from ex-bourbon casks, bottled at 46% ABV. I just gotta double check. Yeah, 46%. They are non-chill filtered, natural colors. Same with the Macallan's releases. These are integrity single malts using excellent quality barley, using excellent quality casks, and the Shelter Point ones are coming in with age statements. I want to support that. I'm on board. Let's go Shelter Point. Consider buying local this Christmas. Our second last category on this list is something I'm giving the moniker of Christmas Hero. Now, we had this category on the list last year as well, and what I mean by this is that if you come through with a bottle of this whiskey, you are a Christmas hero. You're like Arnold Schwarzenegger's character in Jingle All the Way, getting that Turbo Man action figure for your kid. In this case, it's a bottle of single malt Scotch whiskey for whoever is the loved one or friend in your life that you're buying for. Last year, I suggested Springbank, and that really is the case still. If you get someone a bottle of Springbank, you're coming through as an absolute hero because it is so hard to get and is getting very pricey. However, I wanted to throw something different on the list this year. So I'm gonna suggest that if you find a way to get someone on your Christmas list a bottle of Daftmill single malt Scotch whiskey, you're a bona fide Christmas hero. Here's why. Daftmill is a lowland single malt Scotch whiskey distillery. It is a farm distillery. It is a farm distillery, meaning that they actually grow and harvest their own barley that they then malt and then bottle once distilled and aged themselves. It really is quite a fantastic little distillery that they've made, but they work with very small quantities of whiskey. So what I mean by that is they actually only operate 4 months of the year, 2 months in the summer, 2 months in the winter. Otherwise, they're actually running the farm. Now, of that, they typically produce about 20,000 liters of whiskey a year, which is about 100 casks. 100 casks is not a lot of whiskey when we're talking about distillery terms, which means when they actually go to bottle their whiskey, there's not that much to go around. And in fact, they waited almost 12 years. They might have waited actually exactly 12 years to release their first whiskey. And it sells very quickly and it sells for a high price point. So why am I saying it's a Christmas hero if you come through with this? Well, it's very hard to get. It's pricey. And it's also extremely fascinating, extremely nerdy whiskey stuff that actually tastes really fantastic. It's a really wonderful lowland profile. I find it quite malt forward and quite floral. You get some of the farmy notes, but again, some fruits as well. I think it's a really interesting whiskey. I even got a kind of a waxy profile off of this Kensington Wine Market single cask that I have right here. Now, you're not going to find necessarily this exact bottle, but any bottle of Daftmill truly will do. If you're in Canada, there's only one store that sells, and that is Kensington Wine Market. And right now, I believe they have not only the 15-year-old cask strength bottling for about $275 Canadian, I believe, but they also have one of their more standard releases, I believe a winter batch. It's also sold in the United States. It sells out very quickly in the United Kingdom, but I believe it's actually sticking on shelves a little bit longer now. But I think if you can find a bottle of Daftmill single malt Scotch whiskey, you're coming through as a hero. I want to thank everyone that's watched this for watching. I love seeing the comments on the videos. So if you can go ahead and like, share, subscribe if you haven't already, and comment down below what whiskey you're looking to receive as a gift this year. That might give people ideas as well, what they can actually buy for their loved ones or friends as well. Thank you so much to my Whiskey on the West Coast Patreon members. I really appreciate you supporting in that way. If you're interested in becoming a Patreon member, I try to post extra videos, extra reviews, or extra tastings that I do on my Patreon page. I should have one by Claxton's coming out shortly here to continue providing extra content. But thank you so much for supporting me in that way, Patreons. The last category we're going to talk about is best value single malt Scotch whiskey. And what I mean by that is this is the intersection of performance and price to bring us what might be really the best bang for your buck bottling out there. And I'm going to suggest that this Speyside single malt Scotch whiskey is bringing us one of the best value whiskeys on the market. And that would be the Craigellachie 13-year-old Speyside single malt Scotch whiskey. This whiskey is so characterful. It's one of the best alternatives to Springbank 10 if you're looking for something like that. It is spirit driven, but still takes a lot from the casks. You get quite a purposeful sulfur note, spirit sulfur though, not cask sulfur where it can be considered an off note. It really is a meaty, heavy, fruity, and yet flinty sort of whiskey. I find it really engaging. I really love this whiskey, and it comes in at a fantastic price point for a characterful worm tub whiskey. In Canada, in Alberta anyway, you can pick this bottle up for $50 on sale. In BC, it runs about $80 Canadian. That's an outstanding price. I know it can be a bit more in the UK and elsewhere, but for Canada, this is the best value whiskey out there if you can order or buy in Alberta. $50 is an absolute steal for Craigellachie 13. However, if you're not in Alberta and you don't have access to that market, another whiskey I'd like to suggest, which is non-chill filtered, just like this Craigellachie. The Craigellachie is natural color. This one isn't, but it's still a fantastic whiskey, and it's going to be the Glengarry 12-year-old Highland single malt Scotch whiskey. This is bottled at 48% ABV. The Craigellachie's 46% ABV, so you get a little bit extra in this Glengarry. It's a mixture of ex-bourbon and sherry cask. Again, it's non-chill filtered. Unfortunately, they do color it, but this is another one of those great alternatives to Springbank 10 if you can't find it. I find it is actually a surprisingly characterful whiskey. The first time I opened this, I had it just smacked my face with flavor. It's really a wonderful bottle, coming in at an incredible price of $65 Canadian. Honestly, I'm probably going to pour myself a glass of this after this video's done, because it just performs way above its price point for what it gives you. I think it's just kind of sitting on shelves and it's overlooked. And I think anyone who takes a risk on it really is getting a champion of a whiskey. Well, there you have it, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Again, share, like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. I really appreciate all the support. I want to wish you guys a very Merry Christmas. I hope it's a fantastic celebration with you and yours. Please be safe. Please drink responsibly. Make sure you're taking care of your health during all the festivities so that you have many more Christmas seasons ahead of you. From the West Coast, I'm going to steal the Grinch's dram here, which is the naked malt from earlier. And until next time, slàinte.